Good morning. Good morning. Summer out there still? Like the one day you can wear shorts or a skirt to church? Awesome. I didn't today. I should have, but our kids are doing that. Wife's in the skirt. We are going to wrap up our series we've been in for the last 9 weeks, including today, called The Kingdom. We'll wrap that up this morning. But before I spend the rest of my morning talking about the last installment of the Kingdom series, what I want to do is tell you what's next. Starting next week, so a week from today, we have our big fall kickoff. So what we try to do is, we think seasonal around here. We do a big spring kickoff, we do the big Easter thing, and we do a big fall kickoff. And there's certain things that go alongside with that. One is kicking off a new series. So starting a week from today, we will begin this series we're calling When Life Crashes. Not if life crashes, but when life crashes. We're going to look for 7 weeks at the life of Joseph out of the Old Testament book of Genesis. And what's so true about Joseph's life and how we can relate to that is this. For every one of us, there's been a moment in time where life seemed very promising, maybe our work life or our relational life or some other thing, our family life. It seems so promising, and then in one moment, just like for Joseph, it changes. The phone call comes, the pink slip shows up, the email comes, the report says cancer, on and on and on. And so what we want to do with this series is really just say, what can we learn when circumstances aren't our favorite? Is God still present? Because it seems like he might be absent. So we want to explore that through the life of Joseph. That'll kick off next week. A couple of things that coincide with that. One is, as you just heard from Lindsay, we'll be launching our small groups for the same day. So a week from today, small groups launch in addition to our series. Be a part of this. There are 22 great small groups being offered, but there's one awesome small group, the one I'm leading that I want to tell you guys about. It's good to have the microphone, right? Guys, leave me on back there. Here, I'm doing a unique group. We've never done this at Epic before, and I'm looking forward to leading it. We're doing a group that we're calling the Alpha Group, and here's what we're doing with this group on Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. For any of you who are new to your faith, or you're just not even a Christian yet, not even sure if you want to be, but exploring faith, that's particularly who this group is for. There's already 10 of us signed up. We're going to do a meal together every Tuesday night and just begin to explore foundations of Jesus, Christianity, what's the Bible all about, all of those kinds of things. So if you're at that point, or you know someone, either not a Christian but interested in faith, or just new to the faith, but really don't know where to start exploring that faith, I would love to invite you to be a part of that. But the other 21 groups, I'm sure, are going to be great as well. You don't want to miss out on this. This is where the lifeblood of Epic takes place within our groups community. 21 groups, so everything's offered from right after the 11 o'clock service. There's a mom's group Tuesday mornings. There's nighttime groups. There's a downtown group that meets for Wednesdays at lunch. So all kinds of options there. There are girls groups, guys groups. So we just want to make sure, a financial group this time. We just want to make sure that you have an opportunity, yes, to grow in your faith, but to connect with people, to have people that you relate to, because I'm the only one that gets to talk on Sunday morning. So you actually get to talk when you go into your small group setting. I'm joking. Thanks for talking back, at least in some way. So I want you to be a part of that. I want you to invite people to be with you. We've got some great new invite cards out at the information table. It's been really fun to see what God's doing in this season of our church. Over the last 2 months, we've, for the first time ever, averaged over 300 people on Sundays, and we believe that's going to continue to happen, but we want you not just to be an attender, but to actually play a part in that, to prepare and anticipate what God's going to do. This Thursday night, 7 o'clock, in this room, we're having a night of prayer and worship. Brad will lead us in a few songs just declaring to God that, God, we want you to do something grand here in our church and in our city and in our world. And then you don't have to pray out loud, nothing awkward like that. But we are going to just bring our hearts together as a church this Thursday night, 7 o'clock right here, and ask God to pour out his favor. There are people in our congregation who need to be healed. There are relationships that want to be reconciled. There are people in your life that you want to see God break through their lives and do a powerful work. We're going to lift those things and others up this Thursday night. And again, you don't have to pray out loud, but we'd love just for you to be here Thursday night, 7 o'clock, just so we can collectively say to God, God, we don't want to just do what we can do in our own strength. God, we want you to show up. God, we want you to do something. We ask for your favor. And so we'll lead that this Thursday night. It's about 1 hour is the most you'll need to set aside for that. It'll be a powerful, powerful time. So that's what's coming up. But we want to conclude the kingdom series today. What we've been saying in this series is that there's a kingdom that God invites us to live in and participate in, and that Jesus is the king of this kingdom. We've been using the Gospel of Mark to learn, what does it mean to live life in this kingdom? How is it different from what the world gives us an opportunity to live in? And what does Jesus have for us in this kingdom? And what I want to do today is talk about what power and ambition look like in this kingdom. Power and ambition. Now, you may come into a church setting this morning, and you might think if the topic's power and ambition, what you're going to hear from the pastor in the church is him saying, you need to really dial down your ambition. You really just need to be good boys and girls. You need to be kind to one another. You're not going to hear that here. I want this to be the community where you get inspired to be more ambitious than any other community you're a part of. I want to inspire you more than your boss does. I want to inspire you more than your industry leaders do. I want to give you something more grand and more significant to live for. But what I might do with the power and ambition and try to ask you to consider this morning is maybe we need to consider shifting the object of our ambition. Maybe we don't need to give up the power that God's given us in whatever realm, in our family, in our company, in our neighborhood, in our city, but maybe we need to allow the power in our lives that we've been given by God to flow in a different direction than maybe it's been flowing in our lives. So I want to talk today about power, influence, leadership, position, and see what Jesus has to say. Now, what we're going to do this morning is see and hear from the most powerful person I believe that ever lived. Jesus said that he had all authority in heaven and on earth, so I don't know if you've got more power than that. Go for it. But I want you tonight to hear from the most powerful person who ever lived in history. And I also believe, hear this, you can quote me on this, I believe that Jesus was the most ambitious person who's ever lived. I think he had more ambition than Steve Jobs, more ambition than MLK Jr., more ambition than George Washington. I believe that Jesus had more ambition than any person you've ever met or read about, and I believe he's got more ambition than you and me. And so I want you to hear, if he's got that kind of ambition, what can he show us about what ambition and power look like in the kingdom? And so if you have a Bible, open up to Mark chapter 10, the book that we've been in the entire series, as we'll wrap that up today. If you need a Bible, raise your hands. Our volunteers are on it, ready to hand it to you. And what I want to do is let you know what page number we're on. If you have one of the Bibles that we're just handing out, we're on page 550. For the rest of us, Mark chapter 10. We'll start in verse 35. We will read down through 45. But I want you to be thinking this morning, what am I doing with the power, position, and influence that I've been given? Now, some of you feel like you're at the bottom of the chain in your company or whatever, and you're like, Ben, I've got no power or no influence. You will one day. You probably have some today that you don't recognize yet, but you will one day. And I just want you to think, when you live in this really ambition-saturated culture, many people are in the Bay Area because of their ambition. I'm not going to war against that. I'm going to celebrate that. But I want to make sure that we get the intention of what we should be ambitious for down. So would you stand with me? Mark chapter 10, we're talking about power, ambition. What do we do with it? What does it look like in the kingdom? And what does the most powerful and I believe ambitious person in all of history show us about wielding our own power, authority, and influence? Mark chapter 10, starting in 35, it says, and James and John, those are two of the disciples, the sons of Zebedee, they came up to him, that's Jesus, and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, what do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory. Jesus said to them, you do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? And they said to him, we are able. You all have that interview tactic, right? Whatever they ask, you're like, yes, I can. Right? Everybody like, yes. No, I've never touched that in my life, but I can do it. I am with you. And so Jesus says to them, guys, can you handle it? We can handle it, Jesus. We'll see. They said, we are able, picking up in 39. And Jesus said to them, the cup that I drink, you're going to drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left, it's not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. And when the 10, that's the other 10 of the 12 disciples, heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. What does power and ambition really look like in this kingdom? You may be seated. I pray that God will use this. He'll teach us. You and I know we have the same kind of hearts, at least from our origin. And for every one of us, the natural inclination of our hearts is completely opposite of what Jesus is trying to get us to do. Right? And the reason we know our lives have been transformed is because what Jesus asks us to do in this kingdom, we do not have the power to accomplish it on our own. Do not tell me naturally in here that you're a servant leader, okay? Don't tell me that. You're not. I'm not. It's not in my nature originally. It's not what I was born with. I am not naturally a servant leader, and you aren't either. So if we're going to be the kind of leaders and use the kind of power and our ambition in the kingdom the way Jesus wants us to, we're going to have to become something that's not natural. But that's the whole point of this, right? God steps in and does for us what we could never do for ourselves. So right off the bat, what you have here is James and John coming up to Jesus. Reminds me of a kid asking their parent, we're not going to tell you the question, but would you just say yes to whatever we ask you? Right? They say to Jesus, Jesus, we want you to do whatever we ask of you. Like whatever we ask you, we want you to say yes. And so Jesus begins to engage in the conversation, which is pretty humorous, I think, in Jesus' mind. We want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And one of the things these guys learn and what we need to learn is that Jesus doesn't invite us into this kingdom so he becomes a means to an end to us fulfilling our mission for our lives. Let me say it again. Jesus doesn't ask you to participate in this kingdom so that you might manipulate him as the king and somehow get him to help you accomplish what your mission is for your life. What Jesus does in this kingdom is he takes us out of our selfish agenda and he gives us a mission that's from his heart for our lives. And then he says, fulfill this mission. You and I do not live in the kingdom so that we might accomplish what we're after and use Jesus as some genie in a bottle that he might grant us every one of our wishes. And James and John are going to learn this right off the bat. Something you and I need to learn. Many of us, at every one of us, I would say at some point in our lives, if we've had any connection with God at all, we've tried to use it as a means to our own end. And what Jesus is saying to James and John is this is not about that. I'm not just here so that you might use me as king to give you what I have access to. Now, he's going to give us some things he has access to, but it's not for our own purpose. It's not for our own agenda. It's not for our own mission. So what's very interesting about this, when they say to Jesus, we want you to do something for us, that's how Mark says it. In Matthew, the gospel book before Mark, here's what Matthew says about this exact same encounter. Matthew says that their mom asked Jesus for them. I assume none of you are doing that in job interviews, right? None of you are like, Mom, listen, they're deciding between me and this other guy. But if you would just put a good word in for me. And guys, I hope you're not doing that with your first dates, right? Like, Mom, you're just more sensitive than I am. Will you tell her that I really like her? And everybody's like, why don't I ever get a second date? But James and John, according to Matthew, their mom asked Jesus this question. Mark says that it was them that asked him. It's the same story. These are not guys that are arguing with each other. Matthew's saying, here's a more detailed way that this actually came about. James and John put their mom up to it. Mark is saying that James and John are the ones that are asking this because it's coming from them regardless of if it's coming from their lips or their mom. So just so we know, Matthew and Mark aren't fighting about this. They just give a different angle, a different detail about the way that it goes down. And so they're like, Jesus, will you do this for us? Like, will you help us out? And Jesus says, what do you want me to do? And they're like, listen, we understand that when the celebration moment comes, by the way, aren't you glad it's NFL kickoff today? Anybody? Who's your team? All right, I heard Vikings, Eagles, and Chargers. Here's why today's a great day for you. No, there's a different category. Here's why today is a great day for you. At 9:30, there were quite a few Dolphins fans, and it was a great day for them too. Here's why it's the only great day you'll have all season. You don't have a loss yet. You don't have a loss yet. Eagles, I don't think that offense is going yet. The Dolphins fans, though, they were like loud as if Marino was coming back somehow to rescue the Dolphins from their place of, just insignificance. And it's people are leaving the room. This is awesome. Only the Patriots fans leaving the room right now. Hey, your guys are good. What happens with James and John? They're telling Jesus, we know the championship moment's coming. They understand that he's king. They don't understand what kind of king he is. And they're saying, we know that moment's coming, and we understand that you will be center stage. Think of it like an Olympic medalist ceremony, okay? They're saying to Jesus, we know you've got the gold spot in the middle, but every gold medalist needs a silver to his left and a bronze to his right. Can we flank you when it's go time in your kingdom? Can we be next to you when you come into your glory? Every king needs a vice king, right? That's what they're asking for. That's what they're asking for. And Jesus says, listen, my kingdom isn't just about glory and power. It's not just about my rule and my reign and a throne, although it will get to that point. Jesus is saying, I'm headed towards glory, but you need to understand the path that's going to get me there isn't the path you think it is. He's saying, I'm headed towards the throne. You're right. I'm going to sit right there on the throne above all. But between today and the throne is a cross. That's how I'm going to get there. That's how I'm going to wield my power. That's how I'm going to provide that. That's what I'm ambitious for. And Jesus says to him, verse 38, you guys, you have no clue what you're asking. You have no idea what you're asking. They were thinking of only the celebration, only the victory parade, and Jesus was letting them know that there's a different way. Can you drink the cup of wrath and suffering that I'm about to drink? Can you be baptized the way I'm going to be baptized by fire on the cross? Is that what you want? And they say to him, we are able. Jesus says, no, you have no idea what you're talking about. Power works a certain way in our world. It was working the same way in James and John's minds. They wanted the power seat. They wanted the status. They wanted the attention. They wanted to be right there with them in the big moment. And Jesus said there's a different path. And Jesus tells them, this is real interesting because they don't see it yet. Jesus says, oh, you will drink that cup. If you know anything about the way the disciples die, very similar in some ways to the way Jesus died. You will be baptized in the same way, he said. But to sit at my right and left, I can't grant that. God's prepared that for someone. I don't know who, but I can't grant that. And then when they heard it, verse 41, the other 10 disciples became indignant with James and John. Now the question, of course, is that we can speculate on, why are they so upset with James and John? Is it because they're like, yeah, you guys are so selfish and we're holy? I think it's a case of we wish we would have called shotgun first, right? Like, oh, why didn't we? But now that they've heard Jesus' answer, like, oh, I'm glad I didn't say that, right? They're indignant. They all have the same selfish motive. Last week we talked about how Peter said, Jesus, I'll never let you go to the cross. They assumed that because Jesus was king and they had access to this king in this intimate friendship kind of way that no one else did, they assumed that they were just going to get the Messiah ruling, reigning kind of benefits from this king. And they would get that one day. Jesus says about all of us who have faith in him, we will reign with him one day, but that's not just the only thing that's going to occur in this kingdom. And so Jesus begins to tell them in verse 42, he says, you know the way those with power who are Gentiles, you know how they use their authority and influence. Jesus says, you know what the power culture is like here. We know what it's like, right? You know what the power culture looks like. And it's not just a San Francisco 2013 thing. It's an everywhere thing, an everybody thing. It's better in some places and worse in others, but you've been there. You know what the power culture is like. You know what happens when people abuse their power in a church, perhaps. Hopefully not in this church you've seen that, but you've seen that in churches. You've seen people in your family who seem to have the power. Maybe it was your mom or dad or a grandparent. You've seen people abuse power. And most notably, many of you in your companies, you've seen people not handle power in the way that they should have handled power. Here's what happens usually in a culture of power. Usually in a culture of power, the one in power leverages their power in a way that benefits themselves and comes at great cost to everyone under them. Let me say it again. Usually in a power culture, what happens is the one in power, or the ones with power, they typically create and leverage things with their power in a way that benefits them at great cost to those who are underneath their power. But Jesus does the exact opposite. He leverages his power at great cost to himself in a way that benefits us. That's what power looks like in this kingdom. You still want power? Do you still want to be ambitious? That's what ambition looks like. That's how power gets leveraged in the kingdom of Jesus. And I don't want you to answer out loud because you'll sound guilty just like me, but how are you leveraging your power in this way? Hey, Ben, what power do I have? You have power perhaps with your roommates? With your family, the place that you work. Some of you have leadership power in this church. How are you leveraging what you've been given? What is your influence going for? What is it going towards? Moms and dads, how are you leveraging your power in the home? Some of you are like, Ben, I'm not there for 20 years. You will be, perhaps. There's no one with more power in my home than me. positionally? How am I leveraging it? There's no one in this church with more positional power than I have. Am I using my position to get what I want? Or am I trying to do what Jesus did and use the power that God has granted me positionally to serve in this kind of way? What about you? Jesus is offering us a different way to use our power. Jesus is offering us a different motive to have ambition. What is yours for? And he says to his disciples, you know the way the Gentiles do it. They use their position. They use their position. They use their power. They use their authority. And then Jesus says to them what? Not so with you. You see verse 43? But it shall not be so among you. He's saying that's the way it works out there, but not in my kingdom. Maybe every other kingdom in the world, this is what happens with power, but not in my kingdom. And he says, my kingdom won't be like this. You know why he says that? My kingdom won't be like this because that's not the kind of king that I am. Do you still want to participate in this kingdom? It doesn't center around you. Power is not used for selfish gain in this kingdom. Ambition's not about what you benefit from in this kingdom. I'm passionate about this because if every one of us in this room isn't careful, we will live with power and influence, however little or much we have, we will live in the exact opposite way of that Jesus is asking us to live. And we will dismiss it in certain ways. Well, I've got to be the great leader. Then if I don't do it this way, I won't get anything done. I've got to lead from my position. Well, you might need to hire better people, but Jesus is offering you and I a different way to view it. And he's not offering us a suggestion. What does the end of verse 43 say? Whoever wants to be great. Now, if you had a mentor, a boss, maybe a parent, or maybe a pastor somewhere who started a sentence this way, if you want to be great, if you're like me, and now some of you want to be mediocre and you wouldn't lean in, but some of you like average is awesome. But if you heard someone you really respected and trusted, they started the sentence this way, if you want to be great, you would perk up your ears and you would focus, right? You would put your phone away because you're like, who wants to be great? I do. If you want to be great, you must become a servant. Still want to be great? Do you really want greatness? And then, of course, what you've got to ask if the answer is yes is whose greatness? Greatness according to whose definition? Greatness according to which kingdom? And if you're feeling at all guilty right now, I'm just glad I'm not alone. Because the natural inclination of my heart is to be great for me, to be noticed for me, to be well thought of for me, to get gain for me. And I know it's a natural inclination of your heart too, but I also know that Jesus can transform us. That's what he's going to eventually do with James and John. They won't always ask questions like this. One day they'll lay down their lives like Jesus did. They won't always ask these questions. Jesus says, not so with me. Whoever wants to be great must be your servant. And then he says, whoever will be first, you must be a slave of all. He's taking everything, just turning it on its head. And then he gets to 45 and he says, I think what perhaps is Jesus' mission statement for his own life. He says, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, if anyone deserves to be served, it would be the king, right? And just going, listen, I could do that. I can make that happen, but I'm not coming to be served. I'm coming to serve and to give my life as a ransom, as a payment, a deep price, give my entire life. And he's not speaking figuratively when he says give his life, just so we're aware. Like if I tell you today, hey, go give your life for the sake of serving others, I will say that figuratively, okay? Like don't really do that. Don't really go lay down your life physically. But Jesus isn't being figurative. He's being very literal when he says, I came to give my life as a ransom payment for many. When Jesus says, I came not to be served, I want you to think about every realm that you exist in, every arena of your life. Maybe it's with your roommates or your family. I want you to think about how you interact in the neighborhood in which you live. I want you to think about how you interact in your department with your coworkers and with the broader community there that you work with or in your industry. I want you to think about your friendships and your marriages and all the relationships you have and just ask yourself, walk through this exercise with every realm of my life. Do I exist in that realm to be served? Do I exist in that realm of life to be served or to serve and give my life for? It's a great exercise. It's a convicting one for me. But in all the realms that you exist in, are you there so that everybody props you up? And what's crazy is that sometimes we can look like servant leaders. I think you'll see this on the screen, but sometimes we want to be known as servant leaders without actually ever becoming one, right? And so the boss might say this to you, when the reality is that he's trying to get you to double his profits in his pockets. He might say to you, but I gave you a 3% cost of living raise, right? You ever had that? But you know he wants you to produce well. Why? Because of what he gets. Because of what he gets. Listen, what Jesus is saying to us is that being a servant is the DNA of being the king in this kingdom for him. And if it's the king's DNA, then it must be the DNA in the kingdom. And if it's the DNA in the kingdom, if we're going to be a church that expands God's kingdom, guess whose DNA it must be in as well? It must be in the DNA of Epic Church. And not perfectly, but we have really sought to be a church where servanthood is a piece of it since the very beginning. And if we are going to see what I believe God wants to do in the future here at Epic, it's going to take more of us serving. And some of us are happy to sit on the sidelines if we're just honest and watch everyone else do everything else. But imagine what would happen if no one served here. If no one served here, you would have never gotten in the door this morning. There would have been no lights turned on. There would have been no coffee made, and you would be dying right now, right? You should see the 9:30 crowd. No one to turn the sound on. No one to give us lyrics for the songs. No one to lead us in singing the songs. No one to welcome you when you came in. No one to teach your kids about Jesus this morning. No one to host or lead your small group when we launch those a week from today. No one to pray with you in a moment of weakness or to celebrate with you in a moment of victory. What would happen if no one served here? This came to me this morning, and I want you to really get the two pieces of this when I think about service here at Epic. And make sure you get both of them, because I mean both of them. We want you to be served because you're a part of the Epic community. I'm saying it again. We want you to be served, every one of you. We work hard to prepare well. We work hard to give you great opportunities. We work hard to create environments like groups and kids and missions and on and on and on. We work hard. We want everyone who's a part of this community to be served because you're a part of this community. But we also want other people to be served because you're a part of this community. With me? We want you to be served. We're going to serve you. But we want other people to be served because you're a part of this. We want other people. We want to get people off the sidelines. And so you've got one of those volunteer cards. And I want you to leverage your service in a variety of ways. Now, if you don't like kids, don't circle kids, okay? With me? Please. If you can't sing, don't put worship arts. If you think you can sing and we don't think you can sing, you'll never make it to the stage, all right? Just so we're clear. Come on. This American Idol, we love it. But when we get rejected, we're not huge fans. We want you to leverage your gifts seriously as we head into this fall. Tech team, they tell me they can teach you anything that you need to know to run that back there. Yeah, they can. They can do it. If you want to, as far as running the computers, running sound, things like that, weekday administrative help for people that have the time throughout the week, this is a huge need for us. How do you think that all the things get done? The emails, the follow-up, the putting stuff in, taking care of the baptistry, making sure that people are contacted about whatever they're interested in. So there are tons of ways to serve. And as we move into this fall, I don't want you just to serve within our church, although I want you to do that. I want you and I to become servants in our life so that whatever realm we enter into, we're serving. I want you to think about how you serve your roommates, how you serve your family, how you serve those in your industry, those who work down the hall from you. How do your neighbors, if I were to ask your neighbors, what kind of servant is so-and-so? What would they say? What would they say about that? What would they say about you? And I want you to think about the power that you have, no matter what kind of power it is, and influence and your position. I want to ask you, how are you stewarding that in the variety of arenas of life that you're involved in? How are you stewarding your influence in your industry, in your family, in this church, in our city? How are you stewarding your position? And then I want you to think about ambition for a second. I'll ask you a couple of questions on the screen. I think this will help us get a narrow focus about the motivation behind our ambition. Here it is, the first one. What are you ambitious for? What do you want to happen, and that causes you to be ambitious? What are you ambitious for? And I love the second question. This is a great one. When you think about your ambition, when I think about my ambition, when I think about what success I want for my position in our church, and when you think about success and all the things you're ambitious for and all the things you want to do to climb the ladder within your industry, I want you to just ask the question, what are you ambitious for? And then ask this question. Who all wins if you get what you're seeking? Let's don't rush past this. If you get what you're after, if I get what I'm after, are we the only ones who will benefit? If you get what you're after, if you get what you're pursuing, if you get what you're ambitious for, who all wins? Do you hear Jesus saying about his ambition? I came not to be served, not to win alone. I came to serve and to give my life as a ransom for who? Many. 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 So I've got to ask myself this question, right? If God gives me all the dreams of my heart for Epic Church, who all wins? Honestly. If it's about my notoriety, if it's about my status, if it's about getting over my insecurities, then I win. But if it's about people entering into more of the life God has for them, they win. And if they enter into that life and it affects the way they live in this great city and we do it collectively, then our city wins. And if we go out from the city and do this in our world, then our world wins. If you get what you're after, who gets affected by it? And how so? And how so? Jesus takes our ideas about greatness and power and being first, and he turns those things on their head. And here's the deal. You don't become a servant by filling out the volunteer card, though I want you to fill out the card. We're all clear. You don't become a servant that way. We become a servant by learning, as we've said all along in this series, to orient our lives around Jesus. And if we do this, when it comes to our power and our ambition and what we do with our career and our family life, we will become servants. Not because it says volunteer on the lanyard that we wear here at Epic. We will be a servant. So whatever realm we go into, whatever city we move to, when we change industries, we might have to learn a new industry, but we won't have to learn how to be a servant because Jesus has already made us one. And remember this, before we just run fast after becoming an ambitious servant, remember where this all begins. It all begins not with us becoming servants. It all begins with having a servant king who's come to give his life for you. And what he said is that he's going to pay the ransom price at great cost to himself on a cross. Remember, most power cultures do this with their power. Most people in a power culture, what they do is they leverage their power to benefit them at great cost to everyone under them. What Jesus does in the greatest way possible on the cross is he leverages his power at great cost to himself to benefit us. And if you've never placed your faith in Jesus, what an incredible offer he makes to us this morning. He came to serve you. He came to give his life so that you wouldn't have to stay alienated from God forever because of your sin. He came to reconcile you to God at great cost to himself in a way that benefits you. Don't reject that. Don't miss that. And in closing, let me say this. It may sound counterintuitive, but let's go lead well from our positions. Not our positions as a grad student or the manager or the CEO or the vice president or the intern or the lead pastor. Let's lead from our positions of people who have lives centered around Christ. If we do this, no matter how far away this seems, you will become a servant. This is the aim for you. I don't want you to leave here with less ambition or not being a driven person. I don't want you to leave here thinking, oh, I don't need to be so influential. I want you to leave this service as you head into this week thinking, I really need to think about my ambition. I want you to be ambitious. I want you to reject the status quo in every way. I want you to be the best in what you do. Whatever it is, I want you to be the best. But continue to ask yourself this question. As I'm going after it, as I'm trying to be the best, as I'm trying to be great, what's it for? And who will benefit if I get there? Can you imagine how our church could play a role in changing how the city views things? They're used to people being self-absorbed, right? In your industry, unless it's a service industry, people are used to people being self-absorbed. What will happen when we begin to live countercultural in this way? I think our King will be well pleased, and our world will benefit. Let's go there. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you. In really what I think is the most amazing way, Jesus, you had all authority. You were given all authority. You were given all power. You were given a throne. And yet, Jesus, what you do is lay down your life for every person in this room, for every person that's ever been created in our world. God, I pray that you would help us understand that going for greatness isn't bad. In fact, it's good as long as we understand what your definition is. God, I pray that everyone in this room, no matter what their realm of influence, God, for the stay-at-home mom, for the college student, God, for the entry-level person and the entrepreneurs in this room, and God, the people who are at the very top of the chain and everywhere in between, God, I pray that they walk out of here more ambitious than ever. Walk out of here with a greater passion about what they're doing in this world than ever. But God, for all of us whose hearts need to be shifted toward a different object of our ambition, I pray you'll shift it. God, for whatever influence we've been given, whatever power we've been given, may we learn from you and exist in those arenas of life where we have influence and not seek to be served, but to serve and to give in some portion of our life for the sake of others. God, I pray that you would make us the most servant-hearted and servant-minded church in the entire world. God, that will come at a cost. I pray that we would pay it. And God, now as we just consider, again, how servant-minded our King Jesus is and what he's done at great cost to himself to benefit us, may this cause us to be moved so much so that we begin to give ourselves for the sake of others too, following our King in that way, as we seek to orient our entire lives around Jesus. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. Would you stand with me as we respond and just contemplate who our servant King is this morning?